It was a typical afternoon at Gary's auto shop, a humble garage nestled at the corner of a quiet suburban street. The kind of place where engines roared, greasy rags were strewn around, and the hum of steady mechanical work filled the air. Gary, a middle-aged man with a bulky frame and rough hands, had spent his entire life tinkering with cars. But no one knew the truth about Gary. He wasn't just your average mechanic. Gary was an ex-sniper Marine, a fact he kept buried beneath his unassuming appearance. Gary had seen things in his past that no one should have to. He had been a sharp shooter, always hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But that was years ago. Now all that remained were the scars, the muscle memory, and the quiet determination in his eyes that were not as soft as they seemed. On this particular afternoon, Gary was working under the hood of a beat-up pickup truck when a loud rev of engines shattered the calm. His heart skipped a beat as the unmistakable roar of motorcycles cut through the air, growing louder with every second. He didn't need to look up to know what was coming. He had seen them before. The reckless bikers who often cruised through his neighborhood, tearing up the streets without a care for anyone or anything. They had no respect for the quiet lives of people like Gary, who preferred peace over chaos. But today, they weren't just passing through. A group of 3 bikers pulled up to the shop, their engines roaring in protest as they skidded to a halt right outside Gary's open garage. Gary didn't move, not even a muscle. He simply tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand, his knuckles turning white. These were the kinds of men who treated everyone like nothing more than obstacles in their path, but they were about to learn that Gary was far from an obstacle. He was someone you didn't want to mess with. The leader of the group, a tall and muscular man with a biker's vest, leather boots, and a scowl on his face, swaggered towards the garage. The others followed behind him, their laughter and loud conversation making it clear that they were on a mission to disrupt whatever peaceful existence Gary had. "Hey, fat man," the biker shouted, his voice dripping with mockery as he kicked a toolbox out of the way with his boot. "You got any idea how much noise we make around here? What's your problem, huh? Think you own this road?" Gary didn't respond immediately. He simply glanced up from his work, his eyes narrowing. The biker's words weren't new to him. He had heard it all before. But today, there was something about the man's arrogance, the disrespect in his tone, that triggered something deep within Gary. With a controlled motion, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He took a slow breath, keeping his calm. He knew this wasn't the time for violence, but the bikers weren't about to make it easy. "We don't take kindly to your kind of noise around here," Gary said, his voice deep and steady, but with an unmistakable edge. The bikers laughed even harder. "Oh, look at this, guys. The old man's talking back," the leader mocked, rolling his eyes. "What, you gonna fight me, mechanic? You think you can take me on?" Gary's muscles tensed slightly, but he didn't move. He was used to insults. He had spent years in places where talking back could get you killed. His training as a sniper had taught him more than just precision with a weapon. It had taught him patience, observation, and timing. The bikers were unaware of the man they were taunting. They thought Gary was just another fat mechanic, someone who had no capacity for action. Little did they know that Gary wasn't just any mechanic. He had been through things they could never understand. As they continued to jeer and mock, one of the bikers, a short and stocky man, kicked over a metal tool chest, scattering the expensive tools that Gary had spent years collecting. The sound of the tools clattering to the floor echoed in the shop. Gary's fists clenched. It was the final straw. Without a word, he moved toward the center of the shop, his steps heavy and determined. The bikers didn't realize it yet, but their careless actions had just triggered something much larger than they anticipated. Gary wasn't the man they thought he was, and it was time they learned the truth. The leader of the bikers, still full of bravado, grinned widely as Gary approached. "What, you gonna cry now, fat man?" But as Gary reached the center of the shop, something shifted in the air, a quiet tension, like the calm before a storm. The biker's smirk slowly faded as he watched Gary's movements. Gary's posture was still, but the look in his eyes told a different story. It was the kind of look that said, "You've made a dangerous mistake." And just like that, everything changed. The air around Gary seemed to thicken as the leader of the bikers approached, still grinning. The others, still unaware of the tension brewing, laughed and joked, pushing each other around in their usual reckless manner. But Gary's calm demeanor was like a time bomb, ticking quietly, waiting for the right moment to explode. The leader of the bikers came closer, his boots clanging against the floor of the shop. He was ready for a fight, but Gary had no intention of fighting, at least not in the way the biker expected. "You know, I'm getting tired of you talking back, fat man," the leader spat. He reached out to shove Gary, but in that instant, everything slowed down for Gary. His training kicked in. He didn't need to make any sudden moves. He didn't need to rush. With the precision of someone who had spent years in combat zones, he smoothly grabbed the biker's wrist as it lunged toward him. Before the man could react, Gary twisted his arm sharply, flipping him over his shoulder and sending him crashing to the ground. The shop fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the biker who now lay flat on his back, eyes wide in shock. The other bikers froze in disbelief, their laughter dying in their throats. They had underestimated Gary. They had no idea what he was capable of. Gary stood tall, his posture relaxed, but his presence commanding. He knew that this wasn't over yet, and the real challenge was just beginning. The bikers weren't just going to walk away. "You thought you could just destroy my tools, huh?" Gary said, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an undeniable weight. He took a few slow steps toward the fallen biker, who was still trying to regain his bearings. "You thought I wouldn't react. Well, you were wrong." The biker groaned as he tried to stand up, his pride wounded. "You crazy old man," he muttered. Gary's eyes narrowed. The insult barely registered. He wasn't here to prove anything to this fool. He was here to show them that respect was something they had to earn, not demand. The other two bikers stood silently, watching their friend struggle to get back on his feet. Gary didn't even look at them. He kept his focus solely on the leader. "Tell your friends to back off," Gary said quietly, "before things get worse." The leader's arrogance flickered in his eyes, but there was something else now. Fear. He stood up slowly, wiping the dust off his vest. For the first time, the bikers saw something in Gary that made them hesitate. They had provoked a sleeping giant. The leader raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, we'll go," he said, his voice less confident than before. "But you'll pay for this, old man. You've made an enemy today." Gary didn't respond. He simply stepped aside, giving them the space to leave. As the bikers started to retreat, the leader shot one last glare at Gary. But Gary had already turned his back to them, returning to his tools, ignoring their threats. The garage was his domain, and these men would not have the power to take that from him. He wasn't in the business of fighting. It wasn't in his nature. But he also knew that sometimes a lesson had to be taught. As the bikers roared off into the distance, Gary could feel the tension slowly leave his shoulders. He took a deep breath, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The shop was safe. His work would continue. His peace would remain intact. But the bikers? They had learned something that day, whether they realized it or not. Gary was not the kind of man you messed with. And as he picked up his wrench and returned to work, a faint, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. The battle had been won, not through force, but through control. He was an ex-sniper Marine after all, someone who knew when to wait, when to strike, and when to let go. And in that moment, Gary had proven that patience and precision were far more powerful than any act of reckless aggression. But as for the bikers, well, they were about to learn a far deeper lesson. Never judge a man by his appearance, especially when you don't know his past. Gary had lived through things they couldn't even imagine, and he wasn't about to let them ruin his day with their foolishness. As the sun began to set, Gary wiped the sweat from his brow and turned back to the truck he had been working on. His hands moved with ease, his mind clear and calm. Life, in the end, always found a way to balance itself. And Gary? He had a lot of work to do,